This hour, Secretary of State Marco Rubio set to answer questions from senators on the Foreign Relations Committee. This hearing is supposed to focus on the Trump administration's controversial actions in Venezuela, but we do expect senators to bring up a wide range of other topics as well, from Iran to NATO to immigration, and how Rubio's ever-expanding list of titles within the White House fits into it all. Let's discuss right now with MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, editor of The Insider Michael Weiss, and MS Now contributor Paulo Ramos. David, Secretary Rubio is certainly going to be asked about the day after plan in Venezuela, and the White House has tried to suggest that the country is now safe for immigrants or people who fled to return. Have the conditions on the ground changed in Venezuela? What do we know about what's happening there?
There's been some minor improvements in the economy. There's been some money from these oil sales that have gone back into Caracas and other places, but there's no change at all in the political repression that's happening there. Powell has talked to some journalists in Venezuela, but I've heard that the colectivos, these motorcycle gangs that go around, continue. Large groups are banned from gathering, and there's just a sense that nothing has changed in terms of political rights. And there's no deadline, there's no timeline for elections or anything like that. So some economic improvement, but no changes in terms of the return of democracy.
What insights do you have, Paula, as far as what's happening on the ground there? And do Venezuelans buy into what the U.S. is trying to do here and who they are backing as the interim president?
I think it's still the same uncertainty that they felt on January 3rd. And I've talked to some journalists, and they tell me that when they're reporting, they still feel the same fear that they have for many years. If you ask a Venezuelan that's living not in exile, but in the country right now, and you ask them, do you feel free? The answer still remains no. You cannot protest freely. If you're a human rights activist, you're still living in the shadows. Yes, they've released 200 political prisoners, but there's over 600 prisoners that still remain in jail. And the architect of Maduro's repression, Diosdado Cabello, he is still in power. And so I think the fear that I hear from the ground is that on the surface, we can look at some type of democratic transition, but perhaps what's happening internally is that the government, Delcy Rodriguez, is simply figuring out ways to extend her power. And so what does that mean?
We're looking at this live hearing right now as Rubio is giving his opening statements, and he's really framing interim Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez as someone who is acting as a partner so far. But you'll recall in a recent speech, Rodriguez said she has had enough of U.S. meddling. Meantime, Nobel Prize winner and opposition leader Maria Corina Machado described Rodriguez as, quote, one of the main architects of torture, persecution, corruption, narco-trafficking. She's the main ally and liaison with Russia, China, and Iran. Michael, can you make sense of the competing U.S. interests right now?
Well, Reuters reported just today that the U.S. intelligence assessment has shifted somewhat on Delcy Rodriguez being sort of our woman in Caracas. It initially was, when we went in and snatched Maduro, that, well, we can work with her. She's going to uphold the American national interest. She'll deal with us on the oil and all that. Now beginning to see some changes in that assessment, that perhaps this anti-American rhetoric is more than just rhetoric, that there's some substance to it. To Paula's point about the hardliners and this idea of regime continuity, I was talking to a senior Western intelligence official 2 weeks ago who told me some of the prisoners that are being let out are foreign nationals that were snatched by the Maduro regime. And Cabello is personally escorting those prisoners to each embassy. And you don't know what time of day or night he's going to show up with a foreign national, either from Poland or Germany or whatever. And he's doing this as a way to kind of strut his stuff, as it were, and to show his indispensability. Like, you're not going to get rid of me. There's not going to be some night raid to pull me out of here. So I think there's an element here of the Venezuelan regime trying to signal that this is not going to be some kind of Iraq-style scenario. There's not going to be occupation. And indeed, there's not any pretense here of democracy promotion, human rights. This is really a naked oil grab by the Trump administration. And Trump is pretty much outspoken about that himself.
David, it's interesting to think that this is how far we've come from that first boat strike, when everybody was wondering, what is the goal here? Why are we striking these fishing boats? What were then alleged to be drug boats. And President Trump just signaled literally in the last 24 hours, so I'm sure Rubio will get questions about this, that the boat strikes are over. Let's listen to that quickly.
Drugs coming in by water is down 97%. But it's down 97%. and now we're taking them down on the land. The land is much easier than the sea. You had to do the sea first, but the sea is done.
The sea is done.
So former DEA officials have told me that the drugs have just shifted routes in terms of they're coming in over land or they're coming in by container ship. And 2 members of Congress told me that there's been no crackdown under Delcy Rodriguez against narco-trafficking groups in Venezuela.
So did the U.S. accomplish its goal there? I mean, do we even know what the real goal was?
We don't know what the real goal was. And again, the president offers these vague statistics about transport by sea and doesn't include the main transport by land. And it's extraordinary. And then just yesterday, our colleague Julia Jester and I wrote about one of the families of the boat strike victims in Trinidad and Tobago. They filed the first lawsuit asking for a judge to declare the boat strikes illegal, that they're actually not allowed under international law, and asking for compensation for their families. So the victims, it's been at least 125 people that have died, are asking for more details, and we'll see what happens with that court battle.
Paula, Secretary Rubio argues that the U.S. has created conditions in Venezuela for the Venezuelan people to thrive. This, as you know, the administration is sending thousands of Venezuelan refugees or migrants back to Venezuela or Cuba. You have the administration basically ending asylum claims here in the U.S. Rubio oversaw the dismantling of USAID. So I wonder, is the State Department actually implementing policies that would alleviate some of that economic turmoil and the pressures that lead to migration?
No, no. I think what's evident so far, the little that we know from the ground is that the conditions themselves have not led to any type of freedom. And I think what I'm hearing from South Florida, where there's still a huge Venezuelan population, there's that no one is ready to go back. No, they still are very much against this idea that the Trump administration is getting rid of their TPS and humanitarian parole. But I think what's overshadowing everything is that no one is believing the United States right now. Now, the credibility that we have as everyone on the world stage and the international community is looking at the United States as in turmoil, in chaos. From afar, they're looking at the United States, whose own law enforcement agents are killing American citizens. I think all of that helps explain why someone like Delcy Rodriguez now feels somehow emboldened to say, what she did say a couple of days ago. She said, I've had enough with U.S. orders. That type of resistance kind of echoes what Mark Carney was saying in Davos, right? Which is, hey, you small powers, you don't have to comply with Donald Trump. Like, you don't have to accommodate to Trump. More importantly, you do not have to believe the lies. And so I am not saying that Delcy Rodriguez is a saint. She is part of the very same machine of Maduro. But I am saying that someone like her is now looking at us. They don't see a democracy anymore. They see a thug. And that helps explain some of the different dynamics that may be playing out as Marco Rubio is talking.